I don't think in all of the years our country has ever been so humiliated. I don't know, would you call it a military defeat or a psychological defeat? There's never been anything like what's happened here. You can go back to Jimmy Carter with the hostages. We all thought that was a great embarrassment, and we were pulled out of that by Ronald Reagan. This is many, many times worse. This has been the most humiliating period of time I've ever seen. Think of it, 42 billion. I understand Russia spends 50 billion a year for their entire military. We were spending 42 billion, not 1%. They were saying 1%. That's a lot of nonsense. We're spending $42 billion a year on defending this for years and years. We've been there really now, not 20 years, but 21 and a half years. And we get nothing out of any of these things that we do, whether it's them or many other countries I could tell you about. I'm not going to insult anybody right now. But to spend that kind of money and then to have people get on shows and say how inexpensive it was. And I have to tell you also that we lost no soldiers in the last year and a half because of me and because of the understanding that we had. We lost no, think of that. In Chicago and in New York and in other cities in the United States, many people die every weekend. We lost no soldiers in Afghanistan because they knew I wasn't going to put up with it. And that's what happened. So we had a very strong conversation. We shouldn't have been involved. It was a horrible decision going into the Middle East. And I know the Bush family will not be happy, but I believe it was the worst decision in the history of our country when we decided to go into the Middle East. It's turned out to be quicksand. We've destroyed the Middle East. Do you think it's better now than it was 20, 21 years ago? It's much worse. It was a horrible decision, cost us trillions of dollars. And if you look at both sides, because I like to look at both sides, millions and millions of lives. And it's no different than it was. It's much worse because you have to rebuild it. It's been blown to pieces. The worst decision ever made was going. But think of what's happening now. I've heard as many as 40,000 Americans, and the Taliban, good fighters, I will tell you, they're good fighters. We have to give them credit for that. They've been fighting for 1,000 years. That's what they do, is they fight. The Taliban has circled the airport, and who knows if they're going to treat us right. Frankly, Biden didn't have to even go by that agreement. He could have done. Look what he's done to the border. We had the greatest border, southern border, in the history of our country. We stopped drugs. We stopped human trafficking. We stopped people from coming in, prisoners from coming in. Now you'll have, you have the worst people in the world. They're emptying their jails into our country. This is like the southern border, but it's handled even worse. Nobody handled the southern border worse than him. We had the most secure border we've ever had. Now we have by far the worst border we've ever had. Well, Afghanistan is the exact same thing. By the way, I'm America first, okay? The Americans come out first, but we're also going to help people that helped us. And we have to be very careful with the vetting because you have some rough people in there, but we're going to help those people. But can you imagine? Now, what we were going to do just very quickly is we were going to take the military out last, okay, last. The people were coming out, they were going to come out, but the agreement was violated, so I held things back because we weren't going to do anything, again, conditions-based.
Honest to God, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I am. It literally is time for this president to resign.
After all the blood that we've shed over there and all the lives that have been lost over there, what's going to be the legacy of that place? On September 11th, our 20-year anniversary of September the 11th, thanks to the great leadership of Joe Biden, what's going to happen? The Taliban flag is going to be flying over the U.S. Embassy in Kabul. That is embarrassing, it's disgusting, and it's damaging to the national security of this country. We're going to pay a price for this for a long time, thanks to Joe Biden.
Do you regret giving the Taliban that legitimacy? Do you regret pressing the Afghan government to release 5,000 prisoners, which they did, some of whom are now back on the battlefield fighting with the Taliban?
Chris, you make peace with your enemies. The statement that I made that day was absolutely true. You can ask the military leaders on the ground.
This administration is a complete failure in every single way. As a matter of fact, I have my team right now working on articles of impeachment because I'm so disgusted with Joe Biden. You know, I've already filed one set of articles of impeachment.
I'm now the fourth American president to preside over war in Afghanistan. 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. I will not pass this responsibility on to a 5th president. I will not mislead the American people by claiming that just a little more time in Afghanistan will make all the difference. Nor will I shrink from my share of responsibility for where we are today and how we must move forward from here. I am President of the United States of America, and the buck stops with me.
I rise today really with a very heavy heart, one that is filled with sorrow for the families and the loved ones who were killed and injured this week. Only the most foolish and the most callous would not understand the grief that has really gripped our people and millions across the world. This unspeakable act on the United States has really forced me, however, to rely on my moral compass, my conscience, and my God for direction. September 11th changed the world. Our deepest fears now haunt us. Yet I am convinced that military action will not prevent further acts of international terrorism against the United States. This is a very complex and complicated matter. Now, this resolution will pass, although we all know that the president can wage a war even without it. However difficult this vote may be, some of us must urge the use of restraint. Our country is in a state of mourning. Some of us must say, let's step back for a moment. Let's just pause just for a minute and think through the implications of our actions today so that this does not spiral out of control. Now, I have agonized over this vote, but I came to grips with it today, and I came to grips with opposing this resolution during the very painful yet very beautiful memorial service. As a member of the clergy so eloquently said, as we act, let us not become the evil that we deplore. Thank you, and I yield the balance of my time.
It looks like the Biden administration has just failed in its execution of its own plan.
What do you think of President Biden's attempt here to pin all the blame for what's transpired in these last few weeks on the deal he says he, quote, inherited from President Trump and from you?
If the risks weren't so serious, Chris, it'd be pathetic. I wouldn't have let my 10-year-old son get away from this kind of pathetic blame shifting.
Critics say that for the U.S. to cut a deal with the Taliban without the Afghan government even in the room was hugely demoralizing and led inevitably to where we are today.
Yeah, Chris, that's just simply not true. Go read the deal. Go read the conditions that were built into the deal. I was in the room. I was at the center of working to deliver that. The Afghans were in the room. Weak American leadership always harms American security. So this is in the context of a Biden administration that has basically abandoned the global stage in favor of climate change. Right? They've been focused on critical race theory while the embassy is at risk.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of blame to go around, and it was the Trump administration, Secretary Pompeo's staff that negotiated with the Taliban beginning in 2018. And they did a rather crucial thing that I think has been part of the failure here, which is they excluded the Afghan government from the negotiations.
Khalilzad has said that he is satisfied that the Taliban would not allow al-Qaeda to launch attacks against countries outside of Afghanistan going forward. Are you satisfied?
Jake, more than that. More than that. They have committed to us that they would sign an agreement that said that they would break from al-Qaeda, that said that they would take on any to take on. Jake, trust but verify.
Mr. President, thank you very much. Your own intelligence community has assessed that the Afghan government will likely collapse.
That is not true.
Can you please clarify what they have told you about whether that will happen or not?
That is not true. They did not reach that conclusion.
So what is the level of confidence that they have that it will not collapse?
The Afghan government and leadership has to come together. They clearly have the capacity to sustain the government in place. The question is, will they generate the kind of cohesion to do it? It's not a question of whether they have the capacity. They have the capacity. They have the forces. They have the equipment. The question is, will they do it?
How serious was the corruption among the Afghanistan government to this mission failing there?
Well, first of all, the mission hasn't failed yet. There is, in Afghanistan, and all parties, there's been corruption. The question is, can there be an agreement on unity of purpose? What is the objective? For example, it started off, there were going to be negotiations between the Taliban and the Afghan National Security Forces and the Afghan government. That didn't come to fruition. So the question now is, where do they go from here? That the jury is still out, but the likelihood there's going to be the Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely.
I don't think it's going to be something that happens from a Friday to a Monday. So I wouldn't necessarily equate the departure of our forces in July, August, or by early September with some kind of immediate deterioration in the situation.
The administration's view has been the Afghan forces have what they need. They've got the equipment, they've got the forces to fight back. But the Taliban now controls about 60% of the territory in Afghanistan. Isn't it clear that the Afghans at this point don't really have control?
Well, I think our point here is, Stephanie, is that we will continue to provide close air support, making sure that Air Force functions are operable. We will continue to resupply their forces with food and equipment, pay all their salaries. In addition to all of the assistance we've provided over the last 20 years, I'd also note, and this is a question that came up yesterday, that the train, advise, and assist approach that we have been implementing and the range of assistance we've provided was done in coordination with military leaders, and the implementation and designing of that plan with military leaders and civilian leaders in Afghanistan over the last several years. So our larger point here is ultimately the Afghan National Security Defense Forces have the equipment, numbers, and training to fight back. They have what they need. What they need to determine is if they have the political will to fight back.
Thank you. If it turns out that the Afghan forces are not equipped and the Taliban has a complete takeover, would the president consider sending U.S. troops back into Afghanistan?
I'm not going to get into a hypothetical.